my city, a dangerous city, where nothing is what it seems to be, and the people here are not who they seem to be. The double cross is not only a game, but the norm. Staying alive is survival. Staying sane is a necessity. Blackout City, Requiem for Hope's Dreams, by L.A. Sykes. I was stood atop Oblivion Ridge, overlooking the crawling carcass of Blackout City. It was dusk. Below, the Bull Valley microcosm meshed together in apathy and chaos. I felt at home, and I didn't like it. I debated whether to zone my senses with the contents of the blackout vial or chamber of the Glock, or just jump right into oblivion. I was concerned oblivion wouldn't be far enough away. The flashbacks were still blurred and surreal, formless, but had an audio of terror. That I knew for sure. My past went with my face, my identity, after a bar fight that in hindsight looked all too clockwork. The only clue I had was the knowing I'd seen the deepest capability of human evil. That didn't narrow it down, and the Glock was winning the battle for choice. My hand raised itself, and the gun's steel felt the promise of cool serenity on my temple. My trigger finger whispered sweet lullabies and dreamless sleep, but it melted intentions of the voice of a seraph in a yellow headscarf. "Joe Smoke," she said. "Depends." "On what?" "Who's asking, and what you want." "I'm Celia Richard." The second part eludes me. I turned around. She hesitated and gazed down over the city. A cool wind licked her face. "My best friend has gone missing. The pigs won't touch it, and the feds are pretending her disappearance isn't related to the others, pretending they aren't related at all. It's like they're scared of coming into the city." "Ain't fear, lady, just being sensible. So she's missing. Maybe she just walked away from here, or better yet, ran." "They said that too. She told me you'd be different from the cops." She looked away as a tear escaped her right eye. "Who's she?" "The redhead in your office," she said, doing a bad job of hiding her face. "Lily, my secretary. I had figured as much, but I hoped for another woman to have remembered me." Any other woman. She'd have to do for now. It was the best I could hope for, without a face anyway. There's no ego boost for a girl falling in love with the cut of your suit. "She said you'd be up here, and not to startle you," she said, dabbing her face. "It's wise advice. So the cops give you the short shrift. They're guessing she bolted, probably had a shotgun wedding to a buck-toothed used car salesman, and is too ashamed to show the in-laws her catch. Or she went to find herself in an abandoned ranch that included shedding her preconceived ideas and her clothes. I'd heard it all before. Paid by the hour Mr. Dick spiel. The android beat cops looked at probabilities that didn't factor in hope. She had my interest by a brittle thread and began to weave. At first, yes. When they finally believed me that she was no runaway, they got scared. I could tell. They just don't want to admit there's a serial killer on the loose. I'm terrified she's the 8th victim." "8th?" "Yes. Don't you read the news, Joe? It's on every page, but the cops won't have it." "I don't. I've been lied to too much already. Why are you so sure she's connected to these and not fallen victim to any other maniac running around?" "She was last seen after finishing work at the pharmaceutical plant. It's in the district where the 7 bodies were found." It sounded like a creature of habit. With 7 under its belt, and potentially another, it wasn't going to stop of its own volition. I felt my trigger finger tingle in the loop of the Glock, and not for my own scalp. "I'll think about it," I said. "Think fast. She might still have a chance." "Not likely. But you can at least give her a proper send-off when I bring back the corpse," I said with immediate regret. She started to sob, this time through both eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't. I have to face the truth sometime." She wiped her eyes, then focused them on my facelessness. They were a deep amber lagoon, and I had a mind to go skinny dipping. "So you'll do it?" I shrugged, nodded, looked around. I'm agreeing with no promises and oblivion in the passenger seat. That being the case, I won't be offering you a ride home. I'll be in touch. She went to embrace me. I turned away stiffly. I holstered the gun and pocketed the consciousness-destroying drug. I kept it because in this city, it could be your very best friend when the time came. She shouted after me, "Don't you want my contact number?" I left her with the back of my head. I shook it. "I'll come to you for the check, in exchange for your friend when the time's right. I'll find you. I'll follow your eyes," I said as I got in my black Pontiac, parked on the embankment. I left a cloud of gray Blackout City dust for a goodbye and made the office within an hour. She was bent over in the office as I moseyed through the glass-paneled door. Flame-red hair lapped to the base of her spine. Her tight pencil skirt rode up just high enough to display the black cotton roses embroidered into the thigh of her stocking tops. "Why did you send her?" I said. She looked at me over her shoulder and stood up very slowly. She smiled. "If I'd have sent a doctor, you'd have shot him." I tried to smile, and pain knifed me. I held off on the morphadril. The drug would give me a mush, but I didn't want facial expressions she could read just yet. She continued, "And the cops fobbed the girl off. It stinks. There's only you who could put an end to something like this, Joe. I followed it in the papers. It ain't gonna stop on its own." I shook my head. I sat down in my leather chair and said, "What's the killer's method?" She picked up the newspaper on the desk. It was an underground rag called Voices Unite, a hippie mouthpiece that printed what the conglomerates wouldn't. She read, "Seventh blonde dead. In a report leaked to this press from Blackout City's coroner's office, an unnamed seventh victim, of who we have dubbed Death Kiss, has been found. She was reported to have had the life literally sucked out of her before being dumped openly on a known jogging route. The autopsy report revealed extensive abrasion to the lips and asphyxiation without signs of strangling, smothering, or ligature. Lung slides showed upward ripping. This mirrors exactly the fate of the 6 other victims, all blonde, all young, from the industrial district. Police and federal agents refuse still to accept a connection, which to this publication is blatant." She put down the paper and stared into where my face should have been. I tried to raise an eyebrow and doubled over in pain. "Strange M.O. No overt sexual element. No apparent violence. No aggression apart from forcible abduction. No car tracks mentioned." Her lips were bruised, Joe. "From a kiss. A heavy-handed kiss. No attempts at concealment. Not your typical psycho killer. Give me your file, Lily, and some morphadril." She smiled at me. Reapplying the hot pliers and pain receptors flooded my nerves. She licked her lips as she watched me snort the powder. Before her face manifested, I said, "Gotta go. Get some proper work done." Her eyes narrowed, and I nodded toward the floor where she was facing when I'd walked in. It was empty. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "Ditch the husband, and then I might do some flower arranging." She smirked and tugged down the skirt as the door rattled in the jamb on my exit. I re-entered immediately. She looked up at my temporary face, focusing on the lips. She said, "Yes?" I gave her an exaggerated once-over. She flushed. I said, "Where's Morty?" She sighed. "Jail." I nodded. I raised an eyebrow and said, "Get divorced. Sharpish." I caught my face in the glass. High brow and cheekbones. Deep black eyes. Strong jaw. I was a stranger in the mirror. I only recognized the dark suit and the gray trench coat. I liked it that way. It was a good coat with plenty of room to conceal a chamber full of vengeance. I scanned the file Celia Richard had provided as I waited outside the holding pen of Blackout City Jail for my contact, Morty. The room sweated a hard night's regret from 100 million pores. Amy Klein was a young broad with natural platinum hair and a smile that could clean a sewer. Their friendship ran all the way through college and university. With a degree in sculpture, she had no choice but to temp as a secretary at the pharmaceutical plant to pay the bills. I had a sick feeling she was a sculptor herself now, with a motif of stiff death. She had nothing murky about her doings. The information mentioned specifically that no fellas were on the scene since university. Heartbreak of a former flame had cooled her candle for romance. The Romeo wasn't named, but I could see a connection. Morty was the slickest out of the drunk tank posse, which wasn't too difficult. I'd backhanded a money chip to the jailer, who'd smirked when I gave his description. "Oh, the singer," he said. "What was he singing?" "Folsom Prison Blues all damn night." Morty appeared and tipped his hat to the jailer, who shook his head and walked away. "You start singing in my company and I'll shoot a man in Blackout City just to watch him be silent," I said. "You don't smile as much as you should, Smoke." "It's difficult without a face." "Point taken. What gives? You could have left me there till after breakfast." "Apologies. I need to see a man about a killer and a missing skirt by the name Amy Klein. More pressing than porridge." "How do I figure?" "I need to speak to the editor of Voices Unite. They're underground, and I don't know anyone else as underground as a man like you. You're deeper than a tunnel rat." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It's the best you're gonna get." "I'll drive," he said through a crooked smile. He drove like he was still drunk on the Soma, which was safer than me driving sober. I asked, "What's with the cops ignoring the connected killings?" "Rumor through the jail is that it's deliberate. If the folks are scared to go out after dark, they're too scared to hit the street to protest against Nam. Also, apparently uppers and downers are going hand over fist. And that's not just my consumption," he said through a manic grin as he swerved to avoid a hippie in a white robe in the middle of the street, shouting about revelations in garbled tongues. We were deep in the revolutionaries' territory. Pigs were scattered sporadically around, having their android brains fried by questions peppered at them by the disaffected. They quickly dropped pretense of adhering to the Bill of Rights, with brutal interpersonal violence ending any discussions. They were outnumbered, but showed no signs of feeling it. Morty continued. "The more afraid they are, the more help they need to close down their minds. That's where the Soma figures. Then, when they're flagging on the production lines, they need the uppers, Nepenthe. They're all on a merry-go-round of ups and downs. On top of that, I reckon that given the pharma district is the hunting ground, there's no way in hell the man will want their drugs linked to a nutcase stalking around. A public scare of their sanctioned drugs and sober citizens means no cash for armies of pigs, no bombs for Cambodian jungles, or no feathers for Nixon's cronies' nests. It figures the boys at the top have instructed the cops to play dumb. They don't find it too difficult. We've reached our destination. Currency chips only, I'm afraid." "Damn. I've just sent your check via carrier pigeon out the back window. Bad luck," he laughed. "You owe me. See you around." "Maybe we'll end up in Folsom together," he laughed again, tossed me the keys, and headed into a dive bar that blared an electronically distorted Grateful Dead track through the smoke-fogged window. I knew now why they were grateful. The office of the paper was on the top floor of a Buddhist trinket store. I headed up the stairs and was blocked by two skinheads in orange togas. They had machine guns hanging languidly by their sides. I showed my ID as the holograph caught up with my image. Only just. I said, "Peace, fellas. I'm on your side. In fact, I'm actively campaigning for boys to be able to wear dresses without it seeming ridiculous. I'm also a member of Buddhism is Butchery, Blackout City chapter. Put the guns down. I'm not here for trouble." Neither raised their gun, but 4 eyes burnt scorches into my face, smoking out credibility. The door at the top of the stairwell burst open and a wiry, pock-marked support system for a giant afro threw his hands up in exasperation. "You two, what have I told you?" he shouted. The taller mumbled about maintaining safety and narcs and finks and the man. The editor shook his head and beckoned me into his office. He said, "Sorry about that. Paranoia is a necessity. However, it does have a tendency to go overboard." I nodded. "What can I do for you?" "I need some information on a girl named Amy Klein. Her friend, Celia Richard, has hired me to track her. She's convinced she's the latest victim of the Death Kiss killer. You're the only paper sticking to the line, and there's a connection in the 7 other deaths. No one wants to either know or admit it. I need to know what you know. Before we go any further, I saw your pupils dilate when I mentioned the girls' names. You bullshit me, and I will drop you off in a permanent nirvana with your tranny friends. I want facts as cold and hard as this." I opened my coat, giving a full view of the Glock under my armpit. He held up his hands and tensed up. "Spill it. She might still be alive." I went in hard, but Hope's glimmer was fading as the seconds ticked. I raised my eyebrows. He sung. "We all met at university in a political rally, became friends. The 4 of us were inseparable.
Anyway, I got into the revolution full time. They drifted into square life. The end.
You said 4.
Yes, of course. Me, Amy, Celia, and Carl.
Carl?
Celia's twin brother.
It hit me like an Ali uppercut. Amy's heartbreaker.
Well, he just tagged along with us at the rallies because he was obsessed with Amy. When the draft came in, he dropped out and signed up. Had a duty to God and country. Because God is American, right? He shook his head, then continued. The whole thing ruined Amy. Her ideals of peace and their love destroyed. I think he really believed he was going to protect his country.
The editor shook his head again as his eyes welled up. You can put your hands down. How do I find Carl?
The editor relaxed and said, You can't. At least I never heard of anybody coming back visiting from suicide.
Where's the body buried?
How the hell should I know?
Big funeral?
Private ceremony. What are you thinking?
You don't want to know. I got up to leave and he shouted.
You think she's going to be okay?
I headed out the door and down the stairs, shouted back. Are any of us? I pulled away from the storefront as 2 tanks bulldozed through barricades. Behind them they left a tattered banner scrunched into the floor. It read, Napalm is devil tears. Stop making God cry. Peace signs billowed under water cannon spray as mob screams screeched staccato. The land of the free in the dying embers of the 1960s. I ripped along the city coastline over blacktop flanked by rocky black slate juts on the right and a gray still ocean on the left. The city heat had lifted, and clouds make a blanket of the horizon. I reached into my jacket and clicked the safety off my Glock because I knew there'd be 2 storms coming now. I hit the pharma compound with a whipping crack as my Pontiac crashed through the barricades. I left the wheels and entered the lobby of the laboratory. The receptionist's jaw was still on the floor as I calmly asked her for the location of Amy Klein's workspace. I clapped my hands in front of her face and she snapped out of it. A small cloud of makeup escaped her face. She regained her senses, but not her smarts. She said, How dare you barge in here? Why, you rude swine, I'll call security on you. Save it, lady. Security are already coming. You saw my method of entrance. I need to know ASAP. Amy is in grave danger. You want her death on your conscience? Then leave your head up your ass. She hesitated, then gave me the directions to the 3rd floor. I took the stairs and heard jackboots and clinking nightsticks on railings. I stripped down to my shirt, took off my tie, and snorted more morphadril. My knees buckled with a kick of pain as my facial structure contorted. I sat back against the wall under the stair and folded my jacket around my holstered gun. Watched as a throng of security marched haphazardly above and over top, then down the staircase. I checked my ID and saw the hologram of my new face. I was relieved to see blue irises. After the goons had passed, I clambered to the 3rd floor and checked the surnames on the brass plates. Richard, Howard P. I shoulder barged the door open. The office was strewn with bits of paper scattered on the floor. An internal door with a chemical symbol in luminous yellow warned me to be aware of hazard. I didn't need its advice, and entered anyway with my gun drawn. Inside was a thin laboratory with a slim teak counter running one end to the other. Bunsen burner sat idly with discarded test tubes. At the top of the room, a chrome refrigerator stood with its door ajar, contents removed. Back into the office, I hit pay dirt with a weathered chemistry journal that in the top left corner read, Dr. Howard P. Richard, 24 Pierpoint View, Canyon Boulevard, Vail Harbor. I hit the fire escape and left out the rear entrance. A stray goon walked right into the butt of my gun. I took his car keys and left in his van, driving carefully out of the parking lot as the rest of the security detail meticulously closed off the perimeter after waving me through. I waved a nostalgic farewell to the Pontiac as I depressed the accelerator toward the harbor. Howard P. Richards' house was the end standalone building on a row of stucco bungalows overlooking the bay. The rain drizzled out of the darkening sky. I slipped my holster back over my shoulder and shrugged on my trench coat. There were no signs of life either nearby nor inside the property. A low violet light permeated the living room as I forced entry carefully through the front door. Panelwood flooring, bare shelves. On the floor, a picture of a middle-aged couple in each other's arms, enjoying the sunset somewhere serene. It was cracked. Dust covered the glass table. In the kitchen, mold and mildew hung in the air.
The Formica tabletop showed a seat set for 3 with clean plates. A rotten stench blew on the breeze from the hall. I ventured down. There was a door on either side. I opened the one marked with Carl, printed on a ceramic plate with rabbits on either side of the lettering. I flipped on the light. High school pendants adorned the wall. An untouched bed was made up with loving care. On the side of the wardrobe, a picture of a U.S. Marine platoon floundered, held up only by one corner. On the back was visible scrawl. I tugged it off and let it flitter to the bed. It read, "I thought the good fight for God and country was my destiny. I have seen the horrors of man. I cannot see any time on this earth when peace can be universal. The only ingredient for this to accrue is love. It cannot conquer all, however. Without an all-conquering love, we are doomed to extinction. This is merely a when. No revolution will ever achieve its purpose, as our species is cursed to selfishness and destruction of our brothers. I cannot stride in these depths longer. I have drowned. I'm sorry. I will breathe hope no longer. Goodbye, Mother. Do not weep for me." I left the suicide note on the bed and went across the hall to the adjacent door. I turned the handle slowly. A low buzz muffled my ears. The crack of light illuminated a pair of bare feet at the end of the room, dangling. I looked up at the pale face of the lady in the picture. Flies feasted on rotten flesh weeks into decomposition. Then I heard a car outside, a slamming door, footsteps. I was forced into the room. I closed the door and slid under the bed in pitch darkness. The smell of death plundered my senses. The platoon photo. Nom. The dead woman suspended feet away. Panic pulsing through me. Sounds of explosions in my ears. The same familiar nightmares. This time, clearer. Whirring chopper blades. Searing heat. Young grunts. Some crying. Others reveling. Begging in foreign incoherence. Tears. Our tears. Their tears. Thumping gunshots. Crackling fire. Slicing flesh. Disoriented. Then a bang and back to darkness. My sweat drizzles onto the mottled carpet, mixing with the odor of her stale urine. A man's voice, cursing. His boot crunching glass in the living room. Cupboard doors slamming. Furniture bumped. Footsteps getting closer. The door flies open, cracking against the wall. Into the boy's room. Rustle of paper. Weeping sob. Then more footsteps. And the car drives away. Not far. A faint sound of engine idling. I leave the dead woman in the peace of darkness, closing the door, head out following the tire tracks of the car on foot. The gray sand-side road curved into a thicket of palm trees on the edge of the partition mound, marking the beginning of the descending shoreline into the dank, ferocious ocean. In the encroaching darkness, I make out a squat red brick bomb shelter, glowing in the stationary car's headlights. I sprint toward the car with my Glock drawn and my teeth clenched. Howard P. Richards sat with intense concentration on his bearded face. A syringe and small vials of liquids glimmered in the glowing moonlight. I heard a ferocious muffled roar emanate from within the bricks of the shelter. It shook my hand. Howard continued to fiddle without flinching. I shattered the windshield with the butt of my Glock as adrenaline ripped through my body at breakneck pace. "Keep your hands where I can see them, Richard," I ordered. He looked at me in stunned shock. Then his face twisted into a sneer. "My boy is ill. I need to give him this. He could die at any moment without it. Who are you? Leave me and my son alone." "It doesn't matter who I am. I have a nick deep in my gut that says there's a platinum broad in there and she's coming with me. Period. Get out the car. I don't give a fuck about you or your son. I just want the lady." He held my stare. He looked back at the syringe, flicked the barrel, and headed toward the padlocked timber door, fumbling with his free hand for keys. "Take the girl, then leave me and my boy alone. That's what you're saying, isn't it? You'll agree?" he said, pleading. I stared back, and I said, "I promise." The wind picked up, lashing our faces with horizontal rain. He blinked hard, popped the lock, and said, "Stand back." Howard nudged the door slowly. There was silence. A small open fire under a chimney stack lent flickers of light. Light wisps of coiled smoke were being sucked up into its ventilation chute. He swung the door further. It jarred, then ripped open, slamming into the wall. The shelter was bare except for a canvas bunk bed, scraps of raw meat, and a gigantic beast screeching at us. The rush of its exhale forced the skin on my face to pin back. Its presence towered, and its bare skin was ripping at the ferocious musculature structure it displayed. Teeth, overgrown, curled down the front of the jaw, and spittle sprayed the walls. Howard smiled and cooed in a soft, gentle tone. "Carl, come on now, kiddo. It's just me, Daddy. Just your medicine, son." Carl softened, tentatively coming closer to his father, who was poised with the syringe. Over his shoulder I saw a form, lying twisted like a misplaced rag doll. My fear turned to rage. Carl must have sensed it. He roared again and leapt towards me. I was lifted off my feet by the collar, pinned to the wall. My windpipe was being crushed. My temples pounded and my vision dimmed. The Glock hung on the tip of my curled index finger. He leaned his face into mine and howled as his eyes swelled. I clamped my mouth shut and tried the same with my eyelids, but failed. We locked eyes. I noticed a distinct orange dash on the corner of the left iris, and recognition was visceral. My stomach tightened, and panic blanketed my labored breathing. A rapid flash of a weeping general infantry, and explosions and chaos burned my mind's eye. I tried to focus the image, but it blurred and I realized I was choking fatally. Carl grimaced, and I barely registered Howard smiling with tears in his eyes and whispering sweet, reassuring nothings as he discarded the empty syringe. Carl was dazed, looking inside me, sharing my fleeting recognition. His grip loosened, and I gurgled a hacked cough, sucking air greedily. He staggered back, rubbing his temples, disoriented and preoccupied in the crest of the flashback. The beast's veins dissipated and the tension in his taut neck cords relaxed. The medication was kicking in harder with the post-trauma. Howard stroked his son's shoulder and smiled with tears on his cheeks. I straightened my tie, smoothed out my trench coat, and said, "Carl." He looked down on me, reoriented to the room, and snarled with a jaw like a rabid tiger. I looked up, swung my arm, and pumped 4 slugs into the roof of his mouth. Tufts of his scalp skittered over the floor. He sunk to his knees, then slumped forward with an empty thud. Howard looked back between me and Carl. He shook, his face crumbled, then he wept. He knelt next to him and stroked his cooling face. He turned to me and shouted, "You promised you'd leave us alone. Alone, you bastard! Why couldn't you leave us alone? He's just sick, ill, not a bad boy at all. It's my fault. Take me, but spare him. Give him your mercy, please," he begged through cascading tears. "It's too late for that. Your son's been dead since Nam, Howard. I'm keeping my promise. I'll leave you alone now." I carried the dead girl over to Howard's car and put her in the passenger seat. I wiped the tears from my own eyes as I brushed her cheek. It was stone cold to the touch. I swept the hair from her eyes and gently closed the lids with the tip of my thumb. On the drive back, I looked at the passenger seat a couple of times. She remained dead. I parked on the embankment and walked over to the edge of Oblivion Ridge, stopping 9 yards behind Celia. I'd been groomed like a common ape, and I'd known all along, somewhere beneath the surface. I said, "You can keep your money. Your friend is in the car, but she's in no fit state to drive." She kept her back to me. "We never even agreed on a fee, Smoke." "We didn't need to. I'd never take a check from a woman who cries through only one eye." "My tears were genuine," she snapped. "The ones for yourself were. You said it was a single killer. You were too sure. The papers and damn near everybody else can speculate, but you knew for certain. I wondered why. Your tears were tears of guilt, that you didn't want to act sooner. For all I know, you'd never have acted at all if it wasn't for your brother finally tracking down his true love. It cost 7 lives before he found her. Could have been 7,000. I think you knew, too, even though he found her, his killing her would have triggered a worse rampage, and a conscience stretched as thinly as yours wouldn't leave much left." She turned to face me with a sunken complexion. "I don't know what he'd have done, Joe." "And you needed me to make sure we never found out. No wonder you'd given up on the cops." "The feds knew all along. They'd agreed to let him live under my father's treatment. He overdosed after coming back overseas, couldn't cope and wanted to die. In my father's house, his room, Mother kept it like he had it when he was a kid. He found these drugs in Dad's room, took them all. He didn't die, he was warped. He looked dead when Father took him. Mother was told he'd died, and she'd grieved ever since. They were research drugs, classified. Dad's been working on an antidote since. The man wants both. A chemically induced killing machine. At first I didn't see a connection to Carl. Those first girls, but then Amy. Well, I knew. My father wouldn't have it. Wouldn't believe he was getting out through the chimney and roaming around. She wiped her face and looked at me with those amber eyes and said, "Did you see Mother? I know she was struggling." "I saw her all right. I hope you know a good undertaker with a slow week ahead." This time she cried through both eyes. They were red now. "You're a bastard, Joe Smoke," she spat, taking a backward step toward the edge. Whirling wind swirled a fine gray dust between us. "You almost got me killed. Ain't no way to get me to swoon over you. Come away from the drop. What's done is done. You've got to find a way of picking up the pieces." "Don't give me that, Mr. Hypocrite. If I'd have left you here that day, you'd have done the same."
"How do you know I wasn't just waiting to shoot a few doctors?" She laughed.
"Like the quacks say, Joe, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, doesn't it? Doesn't always mean it's a good thing. Just look at Carl."
She smiled with tears streaming down her cheeks. I lunged for her, but she had already taken the step over the edge. All I could grasp was a wisp of hair, a yellow headscarf, and the echoes of a weeping seraph. I dipped into the pocket of my trench coat, looked at the vial of blackout. I was close to knowing at least a part of who I was, and I had an inkling as to why my memory was stolen. I remembered Carl's eyes. He knew, too. I'd blown any chance of that knowledge into pink spatter, and I wasn't sure I regretted it. I put the blackout back into the pocket and unloaded the Glock, letting the clip fall into the fine gray sand. I'd keep the drug for the future. I knew it would get worse than this. I didn't know how or when, but I knew it was inevitable. Because this is Blackout City, in the land of the free, in the dying embers of the 1960s.
The moon is full and it is dripping with blood.
Now comes Blood Moon Rising magazine.
Original fiction,
Creature features,
nightmarish artwork.
interviews, and other original horror.
Visit bloodmoonrisingmagazine.com and join our rising legion.